Hello and welcome back to the Red Alert Armory. Today talking about the Kirov. Everyone who has ever played Red Alert 2 remembers the scene from the beginning of the intro of the invasion, of warships knocking over the Statue of Liberty, conscripts parachuting from the sky. Most of all, at least for me, we remember the cinematic of the Kirov, the beautiful shark-faced airship floating slowly between the skyscrapers in that unnamed American city. The populace staring in stunned silence at the behemoth vessels as they presaged the start of the Third World War. These moments are some of what really stood out to me when I first started playing as a kid, and stick with me to this day. Now, 2 decades later, here I am to investigate this marvelous Soviet wonder weapon with you, the fans of these great games, and I am extremely excited. The Kirov airship is a unique weapon of war that has its root in the common balloon used for sightseeing or for determining the weather. In World War I, these crafts were used in the military for the first time, gaining in popularity for their ability to fly large distances at a decent speed and carry a fair amount of weight when compared to the airplanes that existed at the time. Recently, I visited an aviation museum that had a fair amount of exhibits from everything from the first gliders to the planes that made the first Atlantic voyage, to the planes that were used in the Second World War. From this, I acquired a firm idea of what sort of capabilities people around the world had at that time, in the years leading up to the First World War. Using Zeppelins to bomb cities made a great deal of sense when your average biplane pilot was only armed with a pistol. In real life, these Zeppelins remained quite popular into the pre-World War II years and were viewed as the future of long-distance travel. But as everyone knows, the airships were something of a big failure because of the Hindenburg disaster. The Hindenburg's designer, Ludwig Durr, was forced to, by the labeling of helium, a crucial non-flammable noble gas, which at the time was only the United States had the ability to produce, a strategic resource, and thus non-tradable. Instead, the Hindenburg was held aloft by the use of hydrogen, an extremely flammable gas that, when ignited, caused the airship, the pride of the German airlines, to explode and crash in a field of indeterminate cause, May 6, 1937, in Manchester's Township, New Jersey. The reason I'm talking about the Hindenburg disaster is because the closest analog to the Kirov in real life in terms of technology, capability, and size in that time period is the Hindenburg. Said airship, with the exception of its lift source, was actually very well designed, and had it been available, the helium used in the ship would have likely led to the airship being used in some capacity for civilian flight in the intervening years. For the purpose of this video, I'll be using the dimensions of the Hindenburg as the Kirov's, with some obvious modifications. For instance, in 1937, the method of extracting helium from natural gas deposits was not known to those in Germany, but in 1970-ish Russia, where the game takes place, the method is understood, and especially since the Red Alert universe has much more advanced tech for the time period than in the original timeline. The Kirov most likely used helium for its lift, as well as a pair of lifting engines on the sides. The Kirov lift engines were likely similar to those used in Soviet aircraft at the time, most similar to helicopter engines, but most likely were not as effective at providing lift as engines in, for example, the Hind gunship. This is because the Kirovs were, like the Hindenburg, long-range vessels that had a significant issue of weight. In the Hindenburg, the way they solved the weight of the fuel was by using a type of fuel rarely produced today called blue gas, which is produced when mineral oils such as petroleum are vaporized and compressed into fuel cylinders. This has the benefit of making the fuel close to lighter than air, as the fuel itself is not especially explosive. It is far safer to use than jet fuel, which the Hind runs on. This makes the top performance of the Kirov engines not quite as high as the helicopters, but it does give them an absolutely enormous range, giving them the capability to cross the Atlantic Ocean if needed. This means that given frequent rearming, these airships can reach nearly any position in the battle zone in a matter of hours, come back, and head out again almost without rest. Kirovs are also quite fast, with 2 propellers, one on the top and one on the rear to propel the vehicle at over 100 miles an hour, although they are not particularly nimble, needing to slow down significantly to turn without rolling too much. While this is much slower than the Harrier jet that the Allies have in this era, it is much faster than other airships and gives the Colossus a fairly accurate bomb bay. Speaking of bombs, the ones shown on the airship itself are almost certainly not accurate to what the ship would have been able to carry into battle, as the size of those bombs put them significantly over the maximum capacity of the lifting cells of the Kirov. Most likely they would carry anywhere between 20 to 41-ton bombs, each capable of leveling a building or destroying a tank, more than enough damage to destroy whatever is beneath them. While the Kirov we see in games is at fairly low altitude, they most likely flew at their service ceiling of between 6,000 to 8,000 feet, or for those not using Freedom units, 1,800 to 2,400 meters. Unfortunately, this put them well within the range of most anti-air capable units. Although the Kirov is very tanky in game, the actual Kirov would most likely not be, as to add a layer of armor plating onto the sides would be prohibitively heavy. For instance, if the Kirov is Hindenburg size and has 1 inch of steel armor across its surface, then it must carry about 1,410 tons of steel in addition to its body, necessitating 8 tons more pounds of helium, which is the equivalent of 3,173,547,084 cubic feet to lift the weight. The Hindenburg had 7,100,000 cubic feet of helium capacity, meaning the Kirov would have to be about 165 times larger to carry this weight. It obviously could not be that much larger, so it could not have armor in that amount. Even a fourth of that would still increase the size of the airship by 41.25 times, and it's not anywhere near that big in game. In addition, other armors made from aramid fibers would not be used in this application, as it was first invented in the 1970s by DuPont in America, did not reach the Soviet Union until a fair amount later. Russian synthetic fibers similar to Kevlar had similar properties even then, and if the Kirov was to be the size of the Hindenburg and have a 1-inch layer of Kevlar across the whole thing, it would have to weigh an additional 1,262 tons, well beyond the lifting capacity of the Kirov, as stated. If the armor was to be made of cotton, the armor would weigh an additional 350 tons and weigh the ship down too much. Thus, as unfortunately as it is unsupported, it would be tremendously unlikely that the Kirov would be used to rush enemy bases guarded by the likes of missiles or high-caliber minigun rounds. They would not explode, necessarily like the Hindenburg, but they would not be usable either, as the helium would escape and render them useless. Taking all those things into consideration, imagine what it must have been like on that first day. The military taken off guard and rushing to defend, missiles flying, conscripts gunning down people in the streets, and most of all, the Kirovs flying low over the cities to remind the American people that the Soviets, despite what the president might have said in the past, are not their friends. The droning of the engines, the pop-pop-pop of rifles, and the thundering boom of long-range missiles and 1-ton bombs exploding on the homes and offices of the general populace. The Soviets were not holding anything back in those days, and only avoided destroying what they needed to advance further into the beleaguered nation. In Germany, not yet liberated, the fringes of Western Europe, in the British waters, in Finland and Sweden and Norway, in the Middle East, the drone of these engines and the booms of the bombs of the Kirov would sound out all at once and not stop for weeks or months before the end of the war, and not before every city in the Soviets' past resembled the bombed-out Berlin. Thousands of airships dropping thousands of bombs a day across the whole of the world to satisfy the Romanov Premier and the Russian peoples after the humiliation of the Second World War. Nuclear missiles may have done more in one instance than any other weapon during the war, but it was the Kirov that did the most damage to cities and armies of the West in their war of conquest. A special mention here to the Kirov of Red Alert 3, which was much further advanced than the second game, due to the addition of a rocket engine on the back of the Kirov body and a higher top speed. It impacted the world in a similar way to that in Red Alert 2, but was less effective in total, as much of the fighting in that game was done on Russian soil. There's an interesting question that can be brought up about the lack of air superior aircraft in these games, as something like the F-15 fighting Falcon would destroy the relatively slow-moving Kirov with ease. Rockets or missiles flying at hundreds of miles an hour, and chain guns firing 30mm cannons through an unarmored hull, the Kirov would have no reasonable defense against it, which is presumably why airships never developed as truly effective weapons past World War I in our real world. Perhaps then we can speculate that other factors played a critical role in constructing the world the Red Alert 2 and 3 occupies. For instance, Yuri played an absolutely massive role in creating the circumstances for the Third World War to happen. So, perhaps, as Video Crow's Nest suggests, perhaps Yuri uses influence to guide the weapons development in both Allied and Soviet countries to a point where an airship could be a legitimate force on the battlefield. Another possibility might be that the relative ease in producing airships instead of jet aircraft, meaning that the Soviets could field thousands at the start of the war compared to a couple hundred MiG equivalents. The other aircraft they have in Red Alert 2 are recon ships and helicopters, so perhaps this ultimately was a cost savings mission. For every city being bombarded in the first few hours of the war, there could be a dozen Kirov, destroying infrastructure, making the defensive war extremely difficult for the enemy. On the other hand, it is possible that the Allies just didn't develop the weapons to fight the Third World War because they felt they had the Soviet Union as a puppet state, and so they were actually far behind in the development of their technology. For example, we have the weather control device, a civil engineering tech that was used as a WMD after the Soviets destroyed all of America's nukes, which gives the impression that after Yuri got rid of the nuclear capability, the Allies did not have counters ready that were not conversions of technologies made for other purposes. Anyway, I love airships. The Kirov is one big reason why. They inspire so much majesty and dread, and make for what is probably the most opposing sight on the battlefield besides apocalypse tanks. I have a few games myself that give me the ability to field these things on the battlefield. One of them is Hoi 4, and I can tell you I have a mod that lets me do World War I, and I played a game where I just, as Greece, as I always play Greece, where I developed the Kirov and just spend the entire time, all my money, not doing tanks, not doing anything else, just spamming out as many Kirovs as I could get out and invade. And, I don't do very well. I get curb stomped by nearly everybody around me when I do that, but I just love the idea of having dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of these airships flying over cities the way that Soviets did in Red Alert 2. It's just a really fun image. Anyway, if you like what you saw, thank you for watching, and please consider giving a like and subscribing. I do these once every 2 weeks, thereabouts. I like to start doing them more, but I'm started dividing up my time and money as I can. Anyway, if you'd like to support the show, there is the Patreon, and sharing it around definitely helps quite a bit. Hope you enjoyed this, and for those who stuck around to the very end, the next episode will be about the Terror Drone, one of my very favorite units in all of Command & Conquer. That one is very popular of you guys, and I want to do it justice by increasing the recording quality and increasing the visual quality for you all. Anyway, this is Game Master Karrakin signing off. I hope you all have a wonderful day.